So let's look at this. I think I unlocked the course, didn't I?
Yeah. Good.
Okay. So, some positive and negatives of this class. So first of all, we do not meet for a large percentage of the semester. It doesn't mean you won't still meet with me, but we don't meet as a class because you're supposed to be working hard on your project. Bad news is this is your capstone course. The project is a big project and you will have to document your hours. And the hours you're going to have to document are 20 hours per week working on the project. All right. Keep in mind, every semester I get the students come up like, oh, I work a full-time job. That's not my problem. Okay? You're in school. School's supposed to be your full-time gig from my perspective. If you're trying to juggle other things with that, that's on you. So I don't have any sympathy or whatever. So that's just the way it is. Now, having said that, the first couple weeks of this course are very front-loaded with paperwork, if you will. So during our first 2 weeks, first 3 weeks, let's say, we're going to be completing our idea paper, our requirements document, and our specifications document. Basically, all of the design, the ramp-up architecture stuff that we're going to need to actually fulfill our project the rest of the semester. Okay? So let's talk about those things. So let's talk about the course in general first, and then what the types of projects can be, and then we'll go from there. Okay, let's see, am I in the class? I'm in the class. Syllabus. Okay, so you can read through this whole thing, blah, 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 till you get down to grade breakdown. So, first thing is something called an idea paper. We'll talk about that in a second. That's 10% of your grade. Next thing is a requirements document, 15% of your grade. Third thing is a specifications document, another 15% of your grade. So 40% of your grade is already going to be spoken for 3 weeks from now. Okay? These documents are done and out the door. Next is your documentation. That's going to be delivered with your final project, whatever that is. Then we have that presentation that several of you have attended before. This is a big group, so we'll probably actually start the presentations probably 2 weeks before finals. So we will be meeting at our regular class period. Our first couple of weeks are going to be relatively short meetings, so we probably won't stay the whole time today, but we'll stay long enough to ask all your questions and stuff about this stuff. We'll meet again on Thursday if you have additional questions about your idea paper or want to talk about your idea and help kind of mold it, because the idea paper is due a week from today. Then we will meet again next week, both days. But again, they might be short meetings because of the basically come if you have questions. I'm happy to help you work through your requirements document, your specifications document, so that you can get the highest grade on it as you possibly can. But that's not just the only reason. It's also because that becomes your governing document. We'll talk about those here in a minute. But 10% of your grade is going to be that presentation, that thing at the very, very, very end. Very small percentage of your grade. So if you end up completely screwing up the presentation, that's not going to kill you. Chances are I'm not going to give you a 0 on your presentation, right? Grades on presentations typically are somewhere between a 70 and a 100. Right, so 3 percentage points in your final grade in the class. So don't stress out about that too much. Implementation, though, is a big, big, big chunk, and that typically is where people fail the class. So often, people perceive that a project is a big project because they haven't learned what they needed to learn out of a computer science major, out of your degree or your IT major. So just because a project is hard for you, I have to measure it against, when I approve a project, I have to measure it against how hard that project should be for a senior in IT or in computer science, for the average senior in computer science or IT. Which might mean I'm going to tell some of you that the project isn't complex enough. Other people, then you also get too, optimistic. You try to pick this giant project like I'm going to invent time travel. and teleportation. Either one of those individually might be appropriate. Okay? But both of them together for a single semester project might be asking for too much. So in any case, we'll try to, what we want to do here this very first week is get an idea that's within the scope of what we need to do this for the semester. Then we're going to be looking at the requirements document, then we're going to be looking at the specifications document. Okay, so having said that, we need to work backwards. So roughly speaking, if you are working about 20 hours a week for the duration of the semester, that's roughly 300 hours of work for this project. Now, keep in mind that we're not going to be meeting on a regular basis, so those are some free hours for you, right? So that's 3 hours a week for, let's call it 10 of the weeks. So that's a free 30 hours. Woot. All right, so this is a big project. Now, some of the different assignments. The first assignment that's up right now is this idea paper. So let's actually go over to that real quick and let's talk about that, and then I'll talk about what the goal of the other ones are going to be. So idea paper. This is due 1 week from today. So write a 3 to 5 page paper describing your proposed idea for the semester-long project. This should include who's the client, what problem they currently have and why it needs to be solved, the elevator pitch for your proposed solution, a defense for why your solution is an adequate solution, as well as a defense as to how your solution fits the scope of the senior seminar project in terms of time commitment, approximate 300 hours of total work, and how it relates to your major. So for those of you who are a CS major, your project needs to relate to CS stuff. If you're an IT major, it needs to relate to IT stuff. Therefore, if you're a CS major, there probably is going to be a programming implementation associated with your project. If you're an IT major, that doesn't mean there won't be a programming implementation associated with your project, but it means that there's probably there's definitely going to be a management or a setting up multiple products to work together component to your project. Okay, so your project has to be appropriate for your declared major. Should be noted that this cannot be a paid project. This is a long tradition for this class. So that means if you are employed by a place that it's a job, the project you have in mind is something that is through work, that's fine, but it has to be over and above the normal work hours you're putting in. So you can't be paid for this project. So if you're doing this for your job and you already work 20 hours a week, now you work 40 hours a week for that job. That's just the way it is. So this all fits into kind of our vocation and giving back to community and stuff like that. Let's see. All right, so having said that, let's talk about coming up with ideas for projects. Some students probably already have an idea for something they'd like to do. Other students are looking for something to do. We potentially could come up with some projects around, I can potentially be the client for certain projects. So for instance, if you have a project idea, something you'd like to accomplish, something that you're interested in doing, that you don't necessarily have a client lined up for, then I can, as long as the project seems reasonable, I can become your fake client for this so that you can accomplish that project. So if you have a software idea or something like that that you've wanted to do or you've been thinking about doing and you want to use this as an excuse to do it, that's okay. Okay, it doesn't have to be a live client. Probably the project itself, the appropriateness of the project is more important than whether or not it's for a real person or not. Now, having said that, in the ideal world, it would be an appropriate project for an actual person who's getting help from this project rather than ultimately you're going to turn around and sell this app or something like that. So having said that, just because I said you can't be paid for this, that doesn't mean you can't create a mobile application or something like that and at the end of the semester then turn around and try to sell it. That's fine. You can do whatever you want. You just can't be paid as like by your employer. Bottom punchline is you can't double dip. If you're already working for some place, they can't pay you to do your project when you're already working for them. It's like, oh, well, we were going to have you do this crap anyways. Now you get to do free senior seminar, effectively. So it's got to be separate from that. And if we've actually had this problem in the past. If you try to skirt that, and I'm not guaranteeing we'll find out, but if we do find out, it's an auto F. So there won't be backing out of that. So be ethical, and if you're not going to be ethical, don't get caught. One of the two. Okay, so some past projects that people have worked on that were kind of interesting. Last semester, as an IT project, the Wall twins worked on a hydroponics, 3D printed hydroponics setup, kind of an IT thing, where they 3D printed a bunch of parts and they essentially built an ecosystem for growing plants without dirt. Okay, so they had all the parts for it, and they had an Arduino and hooked up various components to make this thing work, and they had a whole big thing of documentation for how you would go about using this. And the whole thing was about, how can I apply the idea of a 3D printer to solve some problems? That would be kind of an IT type project. Flip side, on the computer science side of things, there's been lots of mobile applications. We've had some games. A student a couple of years ago used the Unity game engine and created like a 3D Pac-Man game. That was actually pretty slick. So take Pac-Man, but now put yourself in a point of view of Pac-Man, and you're running and you get the walls flying by you. So it was kind of interesting. And part of it was he was really interested in learning about 3D game design. So one of the things I would challenge you with for this semester is you're supposed to come into this project with a certain skill set. Now that isn't to say stay in your comfort zone. It's saying pick something that you'd like to learn, because that's going to be what keeps you motivated. So pick something that will motivate you to keep doing it. But that's within your wheelhouse, okay? Or at least within the wheelhouse of where you perceive a computer science person or an IT person should be as a senior. Okay, so for instance, if you don't think you're the strongest programmer in the world and you're a computer science person, decide how far beneath where you should be you really are. Don't pretend like you're a great programmer and try to tackle, Battlefield 3 or something like that. Go ahead.
These aren't team projects, are they?
Not team projects, individuals.
So just the wall things are just...
On rare occasions, we'll do team projects, but I highly, highly, highly discourage it for your own good. So that particular project actually had 3 people on it, and one of them didn't make it through. More often than not, team projects, and it's just the nature of the beast, has one person doing a majority of the work and the other people, yeah. Okay. So having said that, does anybody have any ideas that they kind of want to throw out there as a potential idea that I can give you my 2 cents, my feedback for whether it's kind of in the ballpark, the right ideas, because this will help other people if you already have something. Go ahead.
Well, you and I had discussed what about expanding my last semester project, except maybe to a larger scope now with the attendance, and then maybe make like a app out of it too.
Yep. So last semester he made, so most of you were in the class, so he took a RFID reader and made an attendance tracking thing. So that was more proof of concept. So now let's take that and let's turn it into an actual attendance taking software suite that we can use here on campus, and actually have it be an implemented solution to the problem of taking attendance. And you walk in, you just check in with your card, and probably everything up to, but south of actually connecting it to Banner. Because that would, so one thing as you guys are kind of thinking about ideas, and this isn't IT's fault, but it's for security reasons, students typically don't have access to some of those servers, right? And we've had issues in the past where we wanted to integrate with Banner or something like that, where IT won't give us access. So I would say if we did everything up to but not quite integrating with Banner, maybe even just suggesting a format we might send to Banner, even having a meeting with IT and talking to them, that's saying like, if we were to integrate with Banner, what would be the best format for this stuff to be in? That way we can maybe test that after the fact, but part of the project should not be integrating with Banner because that's setting yourself up to fail, that type of thing. Okay, but for a project like that, so there's a software development portion of that, and then the department is also is willing to help out if there needs to be some hardware or something like that purchased for some solutions. I mean, not ridiculous, like, okay, well, I need a car because I'm going to do that time travel thing, and I need a cushy seat to sit in, right? I need a DeLorean because that's what the movie said you need to do time travel. Okay, plus the flux capacitor, that guy that eats garbage, right? You throw garbage in there. Isn't that what it was? Well, then it wasn't there anymore?
No, it wasn't in the first one. It wasn't garbage in the first one. It was like a new.
Oh, I see. Okay, so if there is a hardware requirement that you need or something you'd like to mess around with, whether it's like Arduinos or a Raspberry Pi or something like that, the department has been known to help out with some of those things. So that's not off the table. I'm not going to promise you anything, but we want cool projects to come out of this. So don't necessarily look at that as a limiting factor. But so with this project, for example, one thing we would do is want to control the scope. What things could it do? And then what things are appropriate for us to say will be deliverable by the end of the semester. Okay, and those are probably going to be two very different things. So right now we kind of have an MVP, a minimum viable product for proof of concept. Now, what's version 1 of our department-only attendance system? It's kind of what we're thinking about. Where version 2 is probably how do we now integrate this campus-wide? Okay? Other ideas? We literally have one person. No project that you've thought about working on with your buddies? Oh, go ahead. I don't. Yeah, I think it's probably going to suck anyways. But
I have two ideas. But first one is just to make a arcade cabinet type thing, and with a piece of emulator software running on a Raspberry Pi. But the emulator software is going to pull RAM files from network, so you don't have to load them on there. You can load them from a different computer.
Okay, so this is like an arcade thing. So they play old Nintendo games and stuff with that on it. Okay, so what are the ethical? So like. Keep in mind, you're going to have people in the audience that might care about that kind of stuff, and you're up here to say, hey, here's a game you should have paid $50 for 17 years ago. Huh?
As long as you own it, you can emulate it.
Own what?
The game. Whatever game you're emulating, as long as you own a physical copy of it, it's legal to emulate.
Okay, is that true? I don't know if that's true.
100% true.
Okay. Well, if that's true and you could defend that, that's fine. So, but the thing would be is. So now as I'm kind of thinking through that problem, the first thing that occurs to me is, okay, so my guess is there's already a solution for that for a Raspberry Pi. There's probably some sort of game emulator type things. There's plenty of emulator stuff.
There's Linux-based ones.
Yeah. So, from an IT perspective, you're taking a product that's already been created and you're applying it to something else. That's acceptable. That's fine. But since the thing already exists and you're effectively installing it, where does the additional complexity come into your problem?
That's where the pulling from network, like having network links instead of it loading onto the Raspberry Pi itself.
Okay, so you're saying, okay, we can. You're selling. The idea would be there would be a solution that you're creating that takes the ability to play these ROMs, okay, emulate these games. But instead of you having to do all the legwork of going and downloading these games and stuff like that, there's kind of an easy solution for clicking a game you're interested in playing from an online resource and having it somehow connect to what's already there, so to make it easier. Okay, so something along those lines. So you're automating that middle step. So instead of me having to go scouring the web, probably illegal sites, looking for ROMs, we give you a nice, convenient place to steal. So we set it up. There's also candy. But ethical stuff aside, something like that would be a realistic type project for the IT side of things, as long as the scope of that project was large enough to kind of condone the total number of hours. And keep in mind, out of that total number of hours, you're creating this idea paper, you're creating the requirements document, you're creating the specifications document. So just as an upfront thing, what that requirements document effectively is you're going to follow some online template that you found. All of you had the 370 class, whether you've felt like you paid attention in there or not, you all had it. So you talked about requirements documents in there, and in the simplest form, I would say a requirements document effectively is a contract between the developer and the client in terms of what will ultimately be delivered. Okay, here are all the features this thing will have. So that requirements document should dictate all the features your final implementation should have in it. And part of that is going to be defending how long each of those things should kind of take. Now, the defense of how long it should take is probably going to be something you discover in the specifications document. So as you go through the specifications document, which effectively says, let's take our requirements document, and now let's figure out how do we meet each of those requirements. This is what we're supposed to deliver. Now, how do we deliver it? It's a matter of thinking through that problem, architecting the at least the high-level solution to each part of that. And from there, you can then say, okay, well, we have 30 requirements in the requirements document. Now that I've thought through those 30 requirements, it's pretty clear to me that 4 of them are gigantic, going to take a lot of time. Maybe we need to throw a couple of those out to make it fit the right scope. So part of that working hard up front here on those several documents is going to allow us to ultimately come out after the specifications document with a streamlined version of the requirements document that says this fits the scope and this is how I'm going to solve the project. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so your first idea is pie in the sky. I want to do this. I haven't really considered how long it might take. I'm going to give you my feedback as to whether or not it sounds like it's plausible that it's in the ballpark. Is it way too big? Is it way too small? Whatever that is. Okay? Best guess. Then we're going to do the requirements document, which is going to help me and you further understand that project. Okay, in terms of the requirements that you envision it. So now you're taking your paragraph-based description, your elevator pitch, and turning it into kind of a detailed checklist, if you will. Then I'm going to look at that and say, okay, well, that seems like a lot, or that doesn't seem like it does that much. Okay. Then you're going to go to the specifications document and you're going to expound on that and say, for each of those things, this is how they'll be solved. That should ultimately be where the rubber hits the road, and we should be able to see that, okay, you've now thought through how you're going to solve each of those individual requirements. Does that add up to an amount of time roughly in the ballpark of what you need to deliver to do well in this course? Kind of makes sense, this iterative process? Okay, we do that up front, so I'm not going to be your best friend the first couple of weeks because you're going to be doing all this, quote, busy work that isn't fun, but it's necessary. All right, so many of us probably went into the software engineering class with this understanding that, oh, well, software engineering means software writing. Then you got into the class and you realized most of it wasn't that. Most of it was planning. Okay, figuring out what's the problem. What does my solution have to have in it? How am I going to solve it? And then finally, at the very end, once you spent all this time talking about it and documenting it and writing about it, finally actually writing it. right? Was that a pretty good description of what software engineering kind of was? Or at least how it was advertised, right? Do you think that's an important part of it? Or should you just dive in and start writing software?
Probably depends on the project size. I would say in a 300-hour project, that's not a very good strategy. It's a bold strategy, Cotton.
But it's a bold strategy. That's dodgeball, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's twofold there. On one hand, it's going to be size of the project. Obviously, if somebody tells you to write a Hello World program, that's not going to require a whole lot of architecting, right? It's like, well, do I actually use Eclipse or do I just do this from the terminal? 30 seconds later, a decision has been made, and we move on. Okay, so it's going to be that, and then also based on your development experience. So realistically speaking, I can probably sit down and write a larger project than any of you could sit down and just write. But I have my limits as well. There's going to be a point where I can't conceive of the project because I'm not omniscient, right? I can't think of everything that might happen. And we've seen that happen in class before, right? Where we tackle a project and then we keep building things onto it, building things onto it, building things onto it. And all of a sudden we've backed ourselves into a wall. It's an interesting learning process, but we certainly could say, you know what? Had we thought this through ahead of time, maybe we wouldn't find ourselves in the current predicament, okay? So planning this stuff out ahead of time is the most important part of it. The more you plan now, the less problems you'll have later on. And most of you are going to end up having problems later on because you're not going to end up spending the real time you need now to plan this, even though you're all nodding and saying, yes, I'm going to do this and blah, blah, blah. Okay? So take these first several weeks very seriously and really think through these papers and these parts of the project, because every single one of you in here, regardless of what you think your competency is relative to what it should be at this point in your college career, has the capability of critically thinking through the problem. Whether or not you feel like you have the capability to actually execute your implementation, that's maybe a whole nother story. But every one of you has the capability of doing the paperwork stuff. So, at the very least, throw everything you have into that to give yourself the best chance of success afterwards. Make some sense? Go ahead.
Do you have any more examples of projects that people have done in the past?
Well, I want to come up with good examples of projects that people have done in the past. We had a student 2 years ago create a... Well, actually, before I say that, let me give you some examples of bad projects. Okay, every single year, somebody says, "Oh, well, I'm going to redo website XYZ," something like that. I can't tell you how many times the computer science website has been, quote, redone as a senior seminar project. Does not work. Okay, it just... In theory, the scope of a project like that could meet the requirements. The problem is that, A, the people don't actually put enough time into it. There's this perception that, a web page is just a couple of HTML files, and, I'm not a great web designer, so I can spend 300 hours and accomplish nothing. I did most of it while watching Netflix, but I wouldn't have been any more productive anyways. Okay, something like that. So those would be, in general, bad projects. Now, having said that, from a web perspective, we had Voltage last year. He worked with a external client who had a business, selling different trinkets and stuff. I don't even know what it was. I don't know if it was like
Those candy things?
lotions and stuff like that. It wasn't like, I think it might have been like a Mary Kay type thing, but like her own. She makes this stuff herself, something like that. I don't know, she makes her homemade soaps or whatever. But she had a zillion different products. Okay, so she had a relatively, for a single person, a pretty complex business that she was kind of self-managing through spreadsheets and stuff like that. So he set up a solution so people can kind of order online and pay online. So there was an online shopping cart. She could accept payments. Her entire inventory was in there. She had a way of managing her inventory. There was pictures. So he did a lot of tedious work that wasn't necessarily difficult work, taking a lot of pictures of things and uploading them to the server. But he created a full end-to-end solution for her. So in the end, you might look at it and say, okay, well, that wasn't the most complex thing in the world. It was complex enough. What he did wasn't just trivial. There was 4 or 5 moving parts that all had to talk to each other, and it had to look reasonable enough that people aren't going to throw up when they go to buy something from her, right? But there was a lot of busy work time where you just sat there for 7 hours taking pictures of stuff and uploading it to a MySQL server or something. That would be an example of, I think, a pretty good project, because he was somebody who probably had, let's say, below average competency coming in as a senior, and really forced himself to play catch up. And in the end, produce something that was surprisingly good. Okay? That would be something I would challenge some of you to do. If you perceive that you're maybe not quite where you imagine you to be when you were going to be a senior in CS, well, you're not going to be able to cop out of this and just do something stupid and say, oh, well, it's the best I can do, okay? Because I kind of know where you at least should be at the minimal level, right? And that's happened before. We had a student a couple of years ago who effectively did a website for, I don't know, what are those meme things? Building the, you know what I'm talking about? Memes? Huh? Is that what they're called? Memes?
Yeah.
Memes? Yeah, and effectively what was actually implemented was something that somebody with even a minimal amount of web experience could probably do in 2 hours. That was the entire semester's worth of work. Well, that's not going to cut it, even if that person, that seemed like it was complex for them. We're about to give you a degree to go out into the world and start producing stuff for people, and they're going to pay you $50,000, $60,000 a year to do this. We don't want you to be sitting in the corner there playing with Play-Doh, because that's what you're, that's what you're good at. Okay, I'm the Starbucks guy. Is that phrasing, or is it just funny? I didn't know if I accidentally referenced the funny part of a weird show. Okay. So, it's tough to say. A website would be an example of something that could be acceptable as long as there was enough moving parts. So from an IT perspective. So let's call a website maybe more appropriate, a generalistic website, maybe more appropriate for the IT person who wants to do a little software stuff for the application. But mostly what they want to do is they want to take a whole bunch of things that have already been built and bring them together into a working solution. So most of what you're doing is configuring, uploading stuff to servers, things like that. The IT skill set. Maybe you have to go in and tweak some code for a couple of plugins or something like that. But in general, you're taking what's already been created and making it work together. All right. Well, the idea is that you can't just go and grab WordPress and say, oh, well, I've implemented an authentication system. Okay, where WordPress takes 5 minutes to install from GoDaddy. Most of that is because you were put into a line with the other 4,000 people who wanted to have their WordPress installed, and it comes with an authentication system. You don't get credit for implementing an authentication system because it was already implemented. Right? So the complexity needs to be in terms of taking these 4 or 5 different products and putting them together to build a solution that couldn't be solved with any individual product by itself. That make sense? All right, so a website is certainly appropriate for a project for either the computer science skill set or the IT skill set, as long as the scope of it is appropriate. So if it's a computer science person doing a website, there's got to be a larger programming component than taking what's been already built component. If you're an IT person, I'm going to expect a smaller programming component, but probably going to expect you to bring more complexity in, because instead of you writing some of these things to get some experience doing it, you're going to take some professionally built stuff that other people have written, which takes you far less time than it might have taken the computer science person to write that stuff from scratch. So in the end, your project might actually be more complex because you've brought together professional solutions for something rather than trying to reinvent the wheel because you thought it was a cool way of doing it. All right, go ahead.
For documentation, is there a specific way that you want us to do it, or can we?
It's going to be project dependent. Yeah, I mean, so whatever's appropriate for the project. So, for instance, if you're designing a solution for a client, so let's take that website that Voltage made for the lady. In the end, the documentation was meant for her, so that she had something that she could go back with 6 months from then, and remember how to add something new into her inventory, that kind of stuff. It also had aspects in it where 6 months from now, if she was going to have somebody else do some additional development, what does that person need to know about the different technologies that were used here? So documentation needs to be customized based on what your project is. So it's going to be most appropriate to talk about the documentation once we know what your project is.
So like comments and code and that sort of thing, or?
Well, I guess just even in general. I mean, don't just comment code to comment code.
No.
That's the worst idea in the world. I've seen teachers, computer programming teachers, who want you to write comments after each line of code. I just want to punch them in the face. Because then a comment doesn't mean anything if it's just in a sea of comments. Right? Code should be relatively self-documenting until it's not. And in that part of your code that really needs explanation, that's where you spend some time putting some comments in. Right? So your variable name should be meaningful variable names. Your function name should be meaningful function names, relatively self-documenting. Sometimes you'll put a sentence or something before something if you want to kind of explain, under what circumstances this might be getting called. But in general, you might bump into this complex block of code where that's where you're spending your time commenting. Okay? Because I didn't plan real well, or just because of the complexity of the project, I got to this point. And the way to solve this was to undo half of what I did here, redo other half of what I did here, and then splice them together in a random way that I hope sort of works. And then sometimes you put just question marks after that. At least the person later on who's going to go and look at your documentation kind of says, okay, well, this part of the project could be weak. That's okay. At least you know what you're jumping into, right? You'd rather have the previous guy say, I didn't really know what I was doing here, so this was my best attempt at it. You might want to double check this. Then think it looks legit, and then all of a sudden you're having to hunt down where these errors came from. Okay, so documentation is going to mean something different for every single project, because the documentation isn't for me. The documentation is going to be for whoever will need your project next. Whether it's some projects, the documentation is going to be meant for the next developer who picks up where you left off. For other projects, it's going to be meant for the client who has to use your solution. And maybe they're going to be handing that documentation to an underling or a new hire in 6 months, and they need to be able to, that documentation should stand on its own to get that person up to speed. Maybe the documentation is a little bit of both. Okay, so documentation is going to come in several different forms, and part of the grade for that documentation will be based on how well it accomplishes documenting your solution for whoever it should be documented for. Other questions? Go ahead.
You still want us to run ideas by you, or is that later?
No, you can run ideas by me.
So
The more ideas people hear, the better they'll be able to kind of get an idea of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate.
So I don't know if this is appropriate or not. You can probably yell at me, but I was thinking about doing a Slack bot, which is kind of a tool for teachers and everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have quizzes or something on there, so it wouldn't be completely just take out a piece of paper every day, go on Slack or something, have announcements and auto send them announcements out to people's emails. You could have assignments due dates. you can integrate with Jake's attendance, so if you miss a class or something, they poke you and say, hey, you missed a class, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
An auto moderator for the general chats, so things don't get too unruly there.
Okay.
Just this tool that administrators or teachers and professors and everyone else can kind of use to simplify their lives.
Now, assuming, do we know that Slack has a public API that'll allow you to? They do?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that could actually be a very good idea. As long as the features, it does stuff that's meaningful. So, the most important thing right there would be, flagging inappropriate language and that kind of stuff. But being able to configure that for different settings. So for us specifically, obviously we're trying, being a Christian university, we're trying to set maybe a little bit more stringent example in general than you might run into at a state school or something like that. But it should still, I get that sometimes we're, when you're buddy with somebody, you might use looser language you might use someplace else. But when you're in a public forum, regardless of whether it's a Christian school or something like that, there's got to be some sort of general decorum. So the idea would be if there's a way to kind of filter on that, or at least send out warnings or something like that, and then send an administrator information about, hey, you probably should remove this. I think that would be really cool. But thinking through that problem of, give me some examples of like, the quizzes or the reminders, some practical things, like when would that make sense? And I believe it would very likely make sense, but that's part of the argument you'll have to make is, are there enough features this thing will do that are not like trick features, but more like, reasonably necessary features to make it worthwhile? I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I like that. Given the correct feature set.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. I think that would actually be very good for us, because that's certainly, I think Slack has been a very good tool for us, but it's also opened up a couple of, interesting questions, depending on who can view things and stuff like that. So let's say that's the case with everything, right? 95% of the time it's fine. It's the 5% of the time when it's not. That's so that needs to have some level of policing, but also not so stringent of policing that you don't want to use the tool anymore, because you're going to get, like me and my YouTube. Did you hear about that with my YouTube?
Yeah.
So I got a strike, a copyright strike on YouTube. So I was
Backstreet Boys again?
Well, I was singing it, but apparently I was doing such a good rendition that I actually was flagged as an audio match. No, so I did like this 2-hour programming seminar thing for a client, and he wasn't able to be there, so I just recorded a screen capture of it. Usually we would do a video chat, so I figured, since I'm doing this, I'll just put a movie on up above. So I was watching a movie, and the YouTube stream captured the audio of the movie. It was on my TV set in the same room, so not on the computer screen. Well, it got flagged. I mean, the movie potentially was questionable in terms of whether or not it was still in the theaters or whatever. But regardless, so we got like an hour and 40 minutes of like matched audio for this for Creed. So I got a strike on YouTube. I can't really fight it.
You could just say someone else was playing it.
Well, I wouldn't lie about it. I mean, let's say it was Rocky IV. Okay, if it was Rocky IV, that potentially could have been on TV. I think I could validly, say, hey, I just had it playing in the background. You could watch the video, obviously see that, it's not like I was trying to send that content out there. It just happened to be playing in the background. Your audio filters picked it up, but I think maybe I'm opening a door that I don't really want them to look in. It's like,
I guess that brings up a good question. Like, for the project, is there any issues with, since we're not releasing it or if you don't release it for gaining money, and since we're not getting paid for it, is there any issues with implementing pieces of software that have like Apache licensing and that sort of thing?
I would say no, not for the project.
Okay.
Those would all fall into the category of if you were to take your project, and this is all reasonable as well for you guys. We don't own your project. Officially, we might, but I don't. The university in general has kind of put out the rule that, you know, things that our students create or things that the faculty create, we want to encourage them to create stuff. So if you're writing something that is kind of stage one of a business you want to start, you don't have to worry that Concordia at the end is going to say, oh, you know, that's a good idea. Now that's ours. So the stuff you're talking about, licensing and things like that, that's less of a concern for the project, as long as we're in the realm of, you know, ethical stuff. But more about if you're going to take your project and now you're going to go and sell it, that's something you're going to have to grapple with. So that might even be part of your presentation when you're talking about some of these licensing conflicts, and these are, you know, what happens next. You know, do I need to look at my project and say, okay, well, this part works, but the way I had to get it to work has some questionable things associated with it. And those are things that need to be grappled with or something like that. But as far as your grade goes and things like that, you don't have to worry about licensing stuff. Yep.
So if we have intentions to make money with the project we want to do, and we're not making money and it's for ourselves, we can go with that.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, you can't really. That statement is so that you don't leverage your current job to have somebody else pay you to do work you were going to do anyways, to also get credit for the class. Make sense? If you have a business idea and you think it's going to be the next $1 million idea, go for it. You know, it's probably not going to be a $1 million idea, but at the very least, nobody's paying you to do it now, right? Completely legit. And if you end up making millions off of it, great. You know, you didn't break any rules. You just can't be paid to do it while you're doing it. You know, so if it's a job for work and you want to say, okay, well, I really need the credit for class, so I don't want you to pay me for this semester at work, that's fine. I mean, as long as you're not being paid for the work you're doing. That would be double dipping. Make sense? So just be ethical about it. Yep.
So like working in something like Microsoft Dynamics CRM, would that be acceptable? Like creating workflows and databases and such?
Quite possibly. So I mean, as long as you're creating a solution for a problem. So like imagine, you know, let's take a client that needs to have a certain workflow for how new clients come into their business, and you kind of set up a solution for them where this is the first point of contact, this is what happens next, here's an automated email that goes back out. That's acceptable. That would be an IT acceptable type project. Computer science version of that would probably be plugging into like a Salesforce API or the Microsoft CRM API for doing some automated stuff. But from an IT perspective, the programming doesn't have to be there, but the solution complexity has to be there. But yeah, certainly. That's a good idea, actually. Any other ideas or questions you want to throw out there? Go ahead.
Are the 3 initial documents part of the 300 hours?
Yes. Yeah. 300 hours starts, you've all already put in 1 hour. So you only have 299 hours left. We've already been productive. Even Haxton.
That's impressive.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Are they 300 hours of the average CS student, or is it 300 hours just hours?
It's 300 hours just hours because, so okay, those are two separate questions. It is 300 hours of just hours. The reality is somebody who's a stronger programmer or a stronger student obviously can probably accomplish more in 300 hours than the average person can accomplish in 300 hours. So now it would be your choice. Do you dumb down your project to match the hours, or do you challenge yourself to do something better? So the 300 hours is an expectation of effort from somebody. So, you know, your 300 hours might be different than somebody else's 300 hours. I'm going to be measuring the complexity of your project against 300 hours for an average computer science student. So having said that, from an enforceability perspective, if you picked a project that you feel was 300 hours worth of work for an average CS student, and you think you could accomplish it in 200 hours, even though I'm asking you to document your hours, if you kind of fudged your time a little bit, to the point where I was convinced that it was 300 hours you put in, it probably wouldn't be a problem, is what I'm getting at. Okay? But be ethical about it. You know, realistically, for those of you who are stronger, I encourage you to pick a challenging project because you want to come out of this even stronger. Many students want to use this project as their evidence that they're ready for industry. So this is going to be this is going to be your portfolio that you're going to be going and trying to get a job with. So if, you're already competing with a zillion other people who got degrees that probably shouldn't have degrees, so you want to have something that can probably set you apart. Okay? So don't just arbitrarily dumb it down because you can, but if you have to, do it. You've kind of earned that right if you're a stronger student. If you just want this semester to be a little easier than it would be otherwise, I'm fine with that. I might be underwhelmed by your project, but it's for instance, if Amish turned in the same thing that Evan turned in, there's a situation there where it could be an impressive project for Evan, but garbage for Amish. Message received.
I can't believe you talked to Beyonce.
Beyonce
I mean, you can at least use Pebble. It's a little bit.
He's
better.
not here.
I know, it's
That's why.
He was supposed to be in my class earlier today.
He just show up.
Huh?
Pebbles having Pebbles.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to him since last semester. I did get a Christmas present from him. That's a level of conversion, I think. You get a Christmas present from a Muslim. That's legit.
Yeah,
It's pretty legit.
well, that one time we baptized them by force.
Yeah.
Must
Diet
have-
Mountain Dew.
No.
All right. What's up?
You didn't behead him after? I thought he was the student that you beheaded, in that master's class.
Oh no, a different student.
Okay.
Yeah, no, a different student.
No, but I'm not saying beheaded.
Yeah, that was a cricket demonstration. That should have never happened.
That would just be bad.
Wait a minute, what's he talking about? People are starting to wonder. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's say like you're meeting a client or something like that's 30 minutes away. Do you count that time as your meeting time with the client?
Sure, it's fine.
Travel.
I mean, we're not like,
I'm not like, trying to get.
yeah, we're not like clicking seconds here. If your project in the end, if you pretty much spent in the ballpark of 300 hours on the thing, you're fine. If you spent in the ballpark of 70 hours on it, and even that was a lie, it's going to be pretty obvious, right? So, round up when you're documenting. I don't care, okay? But I do want you to document your hours. So when you spend time on it, write your start time, write your end time. I don't care how you document it. It can be, on a spreadsheet where you clock in, clock out. You can use an app that allows you to run a report. Doesn't matter to me. Whatever tool best keeps you on task, and kind of gives you an idea what kind of effort you've been putting in. Okay. Now, what I hope we can do next class is hopefully now that you guys can process this a little bit, you can start thinking about some other ideas. And when we come back on Thursday, we'll have a pretty similar discussion where people will throw out additional ideas and we can have some back and forth comment, which will then allow some of you to continue to think about your own ideas, right? If you haven't come up with one. Some good places to start. So, obviously you can come up with your own idea if you want. If you have just an idea for something that you want to do, then I can be your client. If you might approach your church or a family business or a family member or a friend of the family, whatever it is, somebody who you think might have something they need to have done for their business that might be in the ballpark of what you need for this project, and then maybe working with them, you can kind of massage that into a project of the right scope. Maybe what they actually need done is too big. Maybe what they actually want done is too small, but you can add a couple of bells and whistles to it to kind of make it a fit for the project. That's okay as well. right? So each one of you is going to kind of have a different take on this, because some of you are going to be more entrepreneurial spirited, and you're going to be like, okay, well, I want to come up with my own idea, or I've always wanted to write this video game. And if you want to write a video game, that's fine. I mean, that's going to use a lot of computer science stuff. We'll come up with some sort of spin on it, on why that problem needs to be solved. You know, as long as it's a complex enough project to condone the thing, I'm not going to, you know, shoot it down just because it's a video game, because you can learn a lot from writing that kind of thing. Others are going to have trouble coming up with their own idea, and they really need to leverage people around them to say, okay, well, what the heck do you need solved at your business so I can go and do it for you? I need a project. I need it pronto. You know, that type of thing. All right? So next Tuesday by class time, you're going to be delivering a 3 to 5 page paper to me describing this project. We can actually review that during class if you want. If you want to stay at class, I'll probably talk for a few minutes about the requirements document. I will give you feedback on those papers pretty quickly. If you happen to turn in your paper early, to the point where you actually want me to look at it early and grade it, I will. Shoot me an email or actually message me on Slack and say, hey, can you take a look at my paper? I submitted a version of it. You can submit it multiple times. It's up to the time it's due. I mean, I guess, you know, don't submit it 60 times and keep asking me to look at it. Give me reasonable revisions of it, but I'm happy to look at it 3 or 4 times if that's what it takes for you to evolve your idea to a point where you're excited about it. Does that make sense? So, but I won't just haphazardly go on there and grade it if you've submitted it, because I don't necessarily know if it's ready, because sometimes students submit they'll save it and that's their submission, right? So if you do want me to look at it, message me and say, hey, I've submitted something. Can you take a look at it and tell me if I'm on the right track? Something like that. All right, anything else?
So is the idea of paper getting approval for the thing that we want to do for the entire semester?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's getting approval for it. The hope is that between any questions you ask me between now and next class, and anything we ask in next class, and anything between that and the due date, we have enough back and forth discussion where you're sending me messages on Slack and with your idea, and you know, if you're questioning whether or not it's big enough, or you're asking my advice on it, the hope is that when you actually turn something in, you at least know that it's in the realm of a decent idea. So it'll really be the requirements document that will be the official approval for what you're expected to deliver, because that's really what's going to kind of control scope. And then maybe even to a more granular level, the specifications document is going to say which aspects of the requirements document really need to be cut out, because it's going to add more complexity to this than you have time for. It's a version 2 feature, that type of thing. So the idea paper is really, is this worthwhile pursuing? Is it in the realm of an idea that certainly with effort could be turned into a senior seminar project? And the hope is you know the answer is yes to that before you submit that thing next week, because you've asked the right questions, or you just have your own confidence that based on the other ideas you've heard, like, yeah, it pretty much seems like it's in the same ballpark as those. So it shouldn't come as a surprise. I would be surprised if I grade an idea paper and say, this isn't going to work. Okay, then you haven't put in your effort, because then you haven't asked the right questions or something like that. If you just come up with some, you know, like, I've thought about making an omelet. The other day I was hungry, so I decided I'd make an omelet. And I'm kind of debating between 3 and 4 eggs. I settled on 2 because the other 2 seemed questionable.
Might take 300 hours.
Good. Questions, comments, concerns, bribes? All right, come back on Thursday with some ideas to discuss. Even if you don't have an idea yet, I'm not going to take attendance, so if you don't show up, that's fine. But you know, hopefully this banter that we have in here will give some of you ideas on what your project can turn into. So I'd encourage everybody to show up. All right, I will see you then.
So